Keth Vorath sent their best hunter. They did not expect us to send ours. First thing Marcus Rain noticed when he came back from the dead was the smell of artificial lavender. Not real lavender. He knew the difference. Real lavender had a roughness underneath the sweetness, something almost medicinal, like it was daring you to enjoy it. This was the sanitized version. Corporate lavender. The kind they pump through recycled air, in places where they don't want you to panic. He opened his eyes. The ceiling above him was white and seamless, no joints, no fixtures. Just white, curving gently at the edges like the inside of an egg. He was lying on a cot that was too comfortable to be military and too rigid to be civilian, and there was a bandage on his left forearm that he didn't remember earning. Outside the single porthole window, if you could call it that, it was more of a glowing rectangle set into the wall. The light was the deep amber of late afternoon on a planet that wasn't Earth. "You've been out for 11 hours, said a voice. The man sitting in the corner wore no uniform Marcus could identify. He was perhaps 60, with the kind of face that had stopped being surprised by anything decades ago. Gray at the temples, data slate balanced on one knee, stylus tapping a slow rhythm against the edge. "We call it the Annex," the man said, though the Keth Vorath have their own name for it. Roughly translated, it means the place where useful things wait. He set the slate aside. "My name is Director Henley. You attempted to capture Keth Vorath Enforcer-class operative on the transit platform at New Bruges, alone. Without authorization, the operative detonated a resonance charge. 3 of your team are dead, Agent Rain. You survived by falling through a maintenance hatch before the blast radius closed." Marcus sat up slowly. The bandage on his arm covered something deeper than a scrape. He could feel the pull of it when he moved, specific burn of tissue knitting together under a coagulant patch. "The operative," he said. "Drethka." Henley's expression didn't change. Told Marcus everything. "Drethka is alive. He has been active again for approximately 6 weeks. Our intercepts suggest he has acquired something. We don't know what yet. What we do know is that he has become aware of your involvement in the Colonus Compact operation 3 years ago, and he is looking for you specifically. He wants revenge. He wants to make an example." Henley picked up the slate again. "Keth Vorath do not experience grief the way we do. They don't have a word for it exactly, but they have a concept, roughly, the obligation to correct an insult written in flesh. Drethka lost 2 cohort mates at Colonus. By their custom, that debt belongs to the human responsible." He paused. "That human is you." Marcus looked at the window. The amber light had deepened to shade. "So what is the Annex?" Henley leaned forward. "Think of it as a correction facility. Humans who are, as our Keth Vorath liaison politely phrased it, too dangerous to be unsupervised, too valuable to be wasted. We have 31 residents currently. Analysts, combat specialists, 2 xenobiologists who saw things in the field they weren't meant to see. They work. They contribute. They solve problems that would otherwise go unsolved." He folded his hands. "They do not leave." The silence that followed was long enough to be its own kind of answer. "My wife," Marcus said. "She has been informed that you died in the New Bruges incident." The resonance blast was thorough enough that the story holds. Kiss looked at him for a long time. Henley met the look without apology, which Marcus respected, even as something cold settled in behind his sternum and stayed there. "She's pregnant," Marcus said. "We know." He didn't say anything after that. He turned back to the window and watched the amber light until Henley got up and left. And the room was quiet except for the fake lavender pumping through the vents, and he sat with the cold thing behind his sternum and let it become something harder and more useful. The Annex was not a prison, exactly. The distinctions mattered to the people who ran it. So to the 31 residents who understood the shape of a cage, regardless of how nicely the bars were finished. Marcus spent his first 3 weeks learning the place the way he had learned every posting in 15 years of counter-xenoterrorism work, methodically, without appearing to. He cataloged exits. He noted the shift patterns of the 2 Keth Vorath observers who drifted through the facility on a schedule that was almost but not quite predictable. He memorized the maintenance corridors. He ate meals with the other residents and listened to more than he talked, which was not difficult because the others were all, in various ways, people who had seen too much and talked too little. There was a linguist named Okafor who had been in the Annex for 9 years and had stopped being angry about it sometime around year 4. There was a combat engineer named Park who rebuilt alien ordnance schematics in her head as a kind of... There was an old man called Shepard who had apparently been some kind of handler before the annexation and who now spent his days playing a card game against himself that no one else understood the rules of. "You're planning something," Shepard said one evening, without looking up from his cards. "Everyone plans," Marcus said. "Most of them plan in the first week and stop. The really dangerous ones start planning in the 3rd week." He placed a card. "You started in the 3rd week." Marcus said nothing. "Your wife," Shepard said. "It wasn't a question. She doesn't know I'm alive." "That's the one they use," Shepard said. He turned over another card. 31 people in here. You know how many have managed to actually leave? How many?" "1." He finally looked up. "She didn't make it far." Marcus nodded slowly. "I'll make it farther." He said it the way a man states a natural law. Not bravado, not defiance. Just the flat acknowledgement of an outcome he had already decided on. The same way you decide the sun will rise. Shepard looked at him for a moment, then looked back at his cards. "The maintenance tunnels in Sector 3 connect to an emergency atmospheric bleed vent. It cycles on a 17-minute interval. The Keth Vorath observer on night rotation has a visual blind spot at the junction of tunnels 7 and their ocular structure doesn't handle the specific light frequency of the emergency strips well. And there's a supply drone that comes in from the surface every 60 hours through the northern dock." He placed another card. "That's just general information about the facility." "Of course," Marcus said. He left the table. Behind him, Shepard turned over 3 more cards and said to no one in particular, "The best defense is a strong offense. That's what they never understand about us." He went through the vent in the 4th week. It wasn't elegant. Elegant was for plans that had backup options. This plan had the 17-minute interval, the blind spot, and the supply drone, and that was all. He had 3 minutes of margin built into the interval timing, which became 2 minutes when the atmospheric bleed ran long, and became 43 seconds when a service alarm in Sector 2 pulled the Keth Vorath observer 30 degrees off its usual path. He made it to the northern dock with 11 seconds to spare, and folded himself into a cargo pallet cavity behind a stack of nutrient containers that smelled like iron and something sweetly chemical that he would never be able to identify. The drone lifted. The annex fell away below him. He pressed his back against cold metal and breathed through his nose and thought about lavender. Real lavender. Kind, with the roughness under the sweetness, and about the specific weight of his wife's hand when she slept. He thought about what Henley had said. That Dreth Ka was looking for him specifically. That the Keth Vorath enforcer had something. He thought about what something might mean. And by the time the drone touched down at the surface distribution hub near the human settlement of Kala Station, he had a number of theories, none of them comfortable. Zevo was exactly where Marcus had been told Zevo would be. In the back room of a supply depot that smelled like machine oil and old circuit boards, surrounded by equipment that had no business being in a civilian supply depot, wearing what could charitably be described as an outfit and less charitably described as a series of decisions that had escaped into the wild. He was tall, loose-limbed, and had the specific energy of someone who had been banned from at least 6 jurisdictions and found all 6 bans mildly amusing. His hair was a deep red that was almost certainly not natural. His jacket was covered in luminescent fiber threads that pulsed slowly, like something breathing. He was eating what appeared to be a nutrient bar, while simultaneously reconfiguring a Keth Vorath pulsimeter with his other hand, and he looked up when Marcus came through the door with the particular look of a man who has been expecting someone, but is still mildly delighted they actually showed up. "You're not dead," Zevo said. "I've been hearing that a lot. Good news travels." He set down the emitter and the nutrient bar. "I heard you went through New Bruges with no backup and 1 standard-issue sidearm. 2 sidearms. 2. He nodded seriously. "The second ones makes a real difference." He stood, and he was taller than Marcus remembered, which was saying something because Marcus had remembered him as tall. "So you're out of the box. What do you need?" "Everything," Marcus said. "And information." Zevo spread his arms to encompass the room. You've come to the right mess. The information came in pieces and none of the pieces were good. Drethka had acquired a resonance array, not a portable unit, the kind they'd encountered in the field, the kind that could flatten a building, something larger, something that, according to the fragmented intercepts, Zivo had been assembling over the past month from sources that Marcus chose not to ask too many questions about, could theoretically collapse the structural integrity of a human settlement's atmospheric dome from a distance of several kilometers. Ka had also taken Marcus's wife. Not from their home in the settlement of Fontaine. She had been moved to the hospital at New Geneva for a prenatal complication, the kind of thing that happens and that nobody tells dead men about. Drethka had apparently been tracking her as leverage. The intercepts suggested she was being held somewhere near the old excavation sites in the Ratian belt. She had, by the timing, already given birth. Marcus sat with this information in the middle of Zivo's depot for a long time. He was very still. His hands were flat on the workbench. He breathed slowly through his nose. Zivo, who had seen a lot of things in his years of operating in the gray zones between human settlements and Keth-Vorath territory, watched him and said nothing. He had learned, through experience, that there was a kind of stillness in certain people that was not the stillness of calm. It was the stillness of something that has already decided and is simply waiting for the rest of the universe to catch up. After a while, Marcus lifted his hands from the workbench and looked at them. I need to know where in the Ratian belt, he said. Working on it, Zivo said. And while I work, he turned to a secondary rack and began pulling equipment with the efficient energy of someone who does not waste motion. You're going to need better than 2 standard sidearms. He started laying things on the bench. Pair of compact plasma emitters with extended thermal cores. A signal disruptor that had been reverse-engineered from Keth-Vorath technology and, was, in Zivo's words, theoretically legal in most jurisdictions. Body armor that was thinner than it had any right to be and which, when Marcus ran a thumb along the layered weave of it, had the specific density of Keth-Vorath energy dispersal mesh embedded between human, manufactured compression plates. You made this, Marcus said. I had ideas, Zivo said. The mesh practically attached itself. Marcus picked up one of the plasma emitters and checked the charge cycle. His hands moved through the motions with the automatic certainty of someone who has done this enough times that the hands remember even when the mind is somewhere else. Somewhere in the Ratian belt. In a hospital room where a woman he loved had given birth alone, without knowing whether the man she had married was alive or a ghost. You're coming with me, Marcus said. It was not a question. Zivo paused, put his hands in his pockets. He looked at the ceiling, which had 2 deadlight panels, and a collection of equipment cables running across it. Vines. He appeared to be performing the mental calculus of a man who has been in enough bad situations to have a very accurate model of what another bad situation looks like, and who is doing the math on whether the person asking is the kind of person you say no to. I can bench this, he said. But I'm not sitting out. Good, Marcus said, because I have no idea how to fly your ship. Zivo's expression shifted into something that was almost but not quite a smile. Nobody does. That's intentional. Was a stretch of semi-abandoned excavation territory about 4 hours out from Cala Station, a region of pressurized domes and defunct mining infrastructure that the Keth-Vorath had taken a strategic interest in during the early years of the contact period and then largely ignored once the mineral surveys came back disappointing. It had the specific character of all places that were once worth fighting over and then weren't, desolate in the specific way of things that have been used up, the infrastructure half dismantled, the atmospheric domes patched and repatched until they were more scar tissue than original material. It was also, as Marcus noted while Zivo brought the ship in low over the ridgeline, the kind of terrain that an Enforcer-class Keth-Vorath operative would choose for a confrontation. Open approaches. Elevated positions. No civilians to complicate the geometry. The ruins of the old excavation processing hub at the center of it all. The domes still pressurized enough to support life. The maze of access corridors and empty processing chambers, a natural fortress for something that, hunted by patience and controlled sightlines. He's been here a while, Zivo said. That array has been active for at least 2 days based on the EM signature. He's not trying to hide it. He's not hiding anything, Marcus said. He wants me to know where he is. That's reassuring. It means she's alive. She's leverage. You can't use leverage you've already spent. Still reassuring. They came in through the service corridor at the base of the northern ridge, moving through the half-light of the emergency strips, in the kind of practiced quiet that doesn't come from training so much as from having been in enough places where noise was a fatal choice. Zivo moved well for someone whose normal mode of being in the world was large and conspicuous. Marcus moved the way he always moved in the field. Not fast, not slow. Each step placed with the deliberate care of a man who has measured the distance between himself and the next problem. They found the first of Drethka's scouts at the junction of corridors 7 and 9. Keth Voreth's scout in its combat configuration was approximately 2.5 meters of specialized killing architecture, broad thoracic armor, plating, 4 primary limbs articulated for both locomotion and combat, optical clusters that could resolve detail at ranges that made sniping a Keth Voreth operative a tactical proposition rather than a practical one. They saw in wavelengths that humans didn't, was why Zivo had spent 2 hours back at the depot retrofitting the body armor with a thermal signature dampener that would push their heat files into the near-infrared range. The Keth Voreth optical clusters had the most difficulty resolving cleanly. It wasn't invisibility. It was close enough. The scout paused at the junction. Marcus and Zivo had pressed into an alcove in the wall, not breathing. The emergency strips, casting their specific frequency of light across the corridor, in a way that the scout's optical clusters would render as a wash of noise at the boundary where their dampened signatures sat. The scout rotated its head cluster 90 degrees. Something in its posture, some quality of attention, of almost, suggested it was aware that something was wrong with the space in front of it, without being able to resolve what. 30 seconds, 40, the scout moved on. Marcus let out the breath he hadn't taken in almost a minute and glanced at Zivo, who was wearing the expression of a man who has rolled a die and not yet looked at the result. They went deeper. They found Alara Quinn in a pressurized chamber near the center of the hub, a room that had once been the shift supervisor's office. There was still a desk, bolted to the floor. The surface, covered in mineral survey chips that had been swept to one edge. She was sitting in the corner, with her back against the wall, and her knees drawn up. And she was holding something wrapped in the thermal liner from what had once been a field kit, and she looked up when the door came open with the specific expression of a person who has been afraid for so long that fear has stopped being a feeling and become simply a condition of existing. She looked at Marcus. Something in her face did a complicated thing that Marcus had no word for, not in any language he spoke. Not in the 15 years of learning to be precise about what he communicated and what he didn't. It was recognition and grief and fury and relief and something else. Something underneath all of those. Something that had no name. Because it was the specific thing that exists in the space between being told someone is dead and understanding in your body that they are not. You're supposed to be dead, she said. I've been working on that, he said. She looked at him for another second. Then she looked down at what she was holding. She tilted it slightly, not showing it off, just adjusting. The way you adjust something you are holding very carefully. His name is Kale, she said. I decided. Marcus crossed the room and knelt beside her. He looked at his son. He looked at him for a long time, the blunt features, the scrunched concentration of a face not yet accustomed to the business of being a face, the impossible smallness of the hands. One finger against one of those hands, and felt the automatic grip of fingers that had no idea they were gripping. Just instinct. Just the oldest reflex there was. Good name, he said. From somewhere deeper in the hub, a sound traveled through the walls. Not an explosion. More like a resonance. A low, subsonic shuddering that you felt in your back teeth before you heard it in your ears. The resonance array cycling up. Zivo appeared in the doorway. His expression had resolved into something specific and focused. He knows we're here, he said. He's moving. And he's opened the outer dome locks on sectors 4 through 7. Minefield positions, Marcus said. The whole central plaza is seated. I've been reading the EM signature since we came in. Zivo paused. He wants you in that plaza, Marcus. I know. Marcus stood. He looked at Alara. Stay here. Don't open the door for anyone except Zivo. Marcus, Zivo will get you and Kale out. There's a ship on the northern ridge. He met her eyes. I'll be right behind you. She looked at him with the specific look of a woman who is very intelligent and knows when she is being told something that is probably true and possibly not. She reached out and grabbed his wrist. Her grip was stronger than he expected, which he should have expected. Right behind, she said, not asking, stating, holding him to it. Right behind, he said. He meant it. He had no way to prove he meant it. He went through the door anyway. The central plaza of the Radian hub had been, in its operational years, a staging area for shift changes and equipment transfer. It was large, perhaps 150 meters across, floor-plated in the heavy composite material used for mining-grade foot traffic. The dome above it was still pressurized, still intact, patchwork of its repairs visible from below, like a map of every close call the structure had survived. Emergency lighting in the amber-red range painted everything in this of something about to end. Dreth stood near the center of the plaza. Marcus had studied Keth Vorith Enforcer class operatives extensively. He had been briefed on them, had read the xenobiology reports, had spent 3 years tracking one specifically. He thought he had calibrated himself to the reality of what Dreth was. He had been wrong about the calibration. An enforcer in full combat configuration was something different from what the reports described. Reports gave you dimensions, mass estimates, capability assessments, behavioral patterns. They didn't give you the quality of presence, the specific way the thing occupied space, as if the space around it had been reorganized to accommodate something that shouldn't fit in a human-scaled room. Dreth was 2.5 meters of the most evolved killing architecture in the known contact species, and it was looking at Marcus with the focused patience of something that has been waiting a very long time for a specific outcome, and has finally arrived at the moment of collection. Between Marcus and Dreth, the minefield. Pressure-activated charges seeded at irregular intervals, marked by nothing visible to the human eye. The EM signatures Zivo had been tracking were their only map, and Zivo was back with Alara, which meant the map was in Marcus's earpiece, and the voice reading it to him was doing so in real time, from a safe distance, the calm cadence of someone who is very good at their job. 30 degrees left, 4 steps, Zivo said in his ear. Marcus moved left. Steps. Dreth watched. It did not move. This was also in the reports. Enforcer-class operatives did not rush. They understood patience as a weapon. They had been hunting humans long enough to understand that humans, when afraid and uncertain, moved. They twitched. They made premature decisions. An enforcer would wait for the first premature decision and act on it. Marcus was afraid. He knew the shape of his own fear well enough to recognize it without being especially troubled by it. Fear was information. He filed it and kept moving. 2 steps forward, hard right, 6 steps, stops. He moved, he stopped. He was perhaps 40 meters from Dreth now, close enough to read the configuration of the enforcer's combat limbs. The slight forward lean, that meant it was in active tracking posture. Ka spoke. The Keth Vorith language in its full register was not designed for human auditory ranges. Parts of it existed below and above what a human ear could cleanly resolve. But enforcer-class operatives were briefed on human languages for operational purposes, and Dreth spoke in serviceable standard human trade language, slow and precise, and with the particular flatness of something that has learned to make sounds. You came alone, it said. I came with a friend, Marcus said. The dealer. Yes, he is with your offspring bearer. Pause. The Keth Vorith had a very specific understanding of pause as emphasis. You know what I carry, the array. I know. It will collapse the dome of Kala Station in 11 standard hours. The population, another pause, deliberate. The duration of it, an expression of something that wasn't quite contempt but was adjacent to it, is approximately 40,000. You'll kill 40,000 people to make a point. I will kill 40,000 people, Dreth said, to correct a debt. The point is secondary. You ended 2 of my cohort at Kalanis. By the correction right, 3 lives are owed. Your cohort mate at New Bruges made 2. Something in the enforcer's posture shifted. A slight rotation of the thoracic array that Marcus had learned to read. In the reports, Keth Vorath equivalent of a smile. You owe me one life, yourself or 40,000. This is the choice I have brought you here to make. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Behind him, the hub breathed its recycled air. The emergency strips cast amber red across the composite floor. The minefield lay between them like a secret, irregular patient. He thought about what Zivo had said on the ship. The best offense is getting inside the geometry they've built for you and building your own. He thought about Shepard, in the annex, laying down cards in a pattern that only made sense if you'd been watching long enough. He thought about Alara's hand on his wrist. Right behind. I don't accept the terms, Mark said. The shift in Drethka's posture was immediate. Not aggression, not yet, but the adjustment of something recalculating. You don't. I don't accept the terms, Marcus said again, because the array is already dead. Silence. You've been running on the EM signature for 2 days, Marcus said. He was walking slowly on the path Zivo's voice had given him, closing the distance. Zivo got into your array's external relay hub 40 minutes ago. The resonance core has been playing charge since we came through the service corridor. By now it's vented about 90% of its stored energy into the Ratian rock bed. He kept walking. Zivo's voice counted steps in his ear. Quiet, steady cadence. You don't have a threat anymore, Drethka. You just have yourself. Drethka went very still. This was not in the reports. Enforcer's response to disrupted plans as immediate escalation to combat mode. What Marcus was seeing was something different. A stillness, a processing pause, quality of something whose entire architecture of the next 11 hours has just been removed from under it. Keth Vorath correction right was not simply violence. It was structured. It had a form, a geometry, a shape. Removing the geometry left the Enforcer for a moment, without the thing it had been building toward. That moment was small. Marcus had learned, in 15 years, to make very large things happen inside small moments. He covered the last 30 meters in the time it took Drethka to resolve its recalculation. What followed was not elegant and was not brief. The Keth Vorath Enforcer was everything the reports said it was, and the reports were accurate and thorough and had still not fully prepared him for the reality of engaging one in close quarters with plasma emitters, in a minefield in an amber-lit dome. In a place the Keth Vorath called the site where useful things wait. He got hit twice. The first time caught him across the left side. The Keth Vorath combat limb impacted the energy dispersal mesh in the armor, and the mesh did its job, distributing the force across the weave. Distributing force was not eliminating force, and he felt ribs flex in a way they were not designed to flex. The second time he had already committed to a roll, and the impact caught his right shoulder and spun him, and he came up on one knee and fired both emitters into the thermal gap between Drethka's thoracic plating and left articulation joint. The gap that the xenobiology appendix had noted, almost as a footnote, as the point of maximum conductivity in the Keth Vorath combat chassis. The shot landed clean. Drethka staggered. Not fell. Staggered, which meant the fight had more left in it, and the fight did have more left in it. Another 4 minutes that Marcus would later be unable to fully reconstruct chronologically, a series of movements and impacts and decisions made faster than conscious thought in the amber-red light on the composite floor. He was aware, at some point, that Drethka had maneuvered him to a specific position. He registered this, and the reason for it at almost the same moment. Pressure, indicator on the emitter readout, and the specific quality of the floor under his left boot, which had a very slight give to it, that composite flooring in good condition did not have. He was standing on a mine. Ka had its limbs positioned with that Enforcer patience, waiting. The geometry was back. Different geometry, improvised but functional. The moment Marcus lifted his foot, the charge would detonate. At this range, even with the dispersal mesh, it would be enough. Ka looked at him with its optical clusters, and did the thing that was almost a smile again. Marcus looked back. He thought about Shepard. About the card game he never explained the rules to, and the one thing Shepard had told him that mattered. The best defense is a strong offense. Not the offense of acting first. The offense of being willing to accept a cost that your opponent has calculated you won't pay. He reached into his jacket and took out the signal disruptor. The one Zivo had reverse-engineered from Keth Vorath components and described as theoretically legal in most jurisdictions. He had reconfigured it during the 4-hour flight to the Ration belt for a very specific purpose. Not jamming, not blocking. Something more targeted, a localized resonance inversion that would detonate every pressure charge in the minefield, simultaneously within a 20-meter radius, including the one he was standing on. The Kethvorath correction right had a concept for this. Marcus had read about it once in a Xenoanthropology digest he'd skimmed during a long transit. The concept was something like the insistence of the living creature on its own continuation, even against certain cost. The Kethvorath found it baffling as a trait. They had studied it extensively and had never fully understood it. Because they understood self-preservation as rational and sacrifice as transactional, and what they could not model was the third thing. The thing that was neither, the thing that was simply human, was the willingness to be in the fire at the same time as the thing you were burning. Zevo, Marcus said into the earpiece. Ready, Zevo said. Now. He triggered the disruptor. The plaza went white. The armor did what armor is supposed to do. It distributed. It was not a complete solution. He woke up flat on the composite floor with the ceiling above him, showing 3 new structural cracks in the dome. Patches in the emergency strips, flickering, in a way that suggested they had not enjoyed the experience either. His left arm was not responding to instructions, which he noted with the administrative calm of someone who has been through enough to stop being surprised by individual body parts going offline temporarily. His ribs had finished flexing and were now making their opinion known. The right side of his face felt like someone had pressed a hot iron against it. He turned his head. Drethka was 3 meters away. The Kethvorath enforcer had been closer to the detonation center and had not been wearing dispersal mesh. It was not moving. It lay still for a moment. The dome above him groaned faintly. Amber light. Cracked patches. The specific smell of a controlled demolition that had been somewhat less controlled than intended. He heard footsteps. Zevo came through the access corridor at a pace that was close to running, but retaining enough dignity to not quite be running. Marcus recognized as Zevo's standard emergency register. Behind him, Alara, with Kale against her chest, one hand braced on the corridor wall. She moved fast. She did not look fragile. She had never looked fragile, not once in the 8 years Marcus had known her. But there was a quality to her movement now. That was something he would think about later. The way a person moves when they have been afraid for a very long time and the fear is not gone, but has been reclassified. She knelt next to him on the composite floor. She looked at his left arm, which was lying at an angle that arms do not typically lie at. She looked at his face. Right behind, she said. Right behind, he confirmed. She was quiet for a moment. She adjusted Kale against her chest. The baby made the specific sound that very new humans make when they are not hungry or in pain, but simply aware of existing and finding existence. Somewhat remarkable. He needs a better story than this, Alara said, when he's old enough to ask. I'll work on it, Marcus said. Zevo appeared above him, assessed the left arm with the practical expression of a man who has set a number of bones in the field, and is running the procedure in his head. The ship is prepped. Goldsmith from the annex, the communications analyst, he forwarded the array discharge logs to the Colonial Authority. The evidence package should be enough to formally close the Colonist debt file. The Kethvorath Verification Tribunal requires physical evidence of enforcer action to formally. Zevo, Marcus said. Yes, in a minute. Psst. Zevo looked at the 3 of them on the composite floor of the hub. The operative who had come back from the dead, the woman who had given birth in a Kethvorath stronghold, the baby who had no idea about any of it yet, and was making the sounds of someone finding existence remarkable. And he put his hands in his pockets and turned around and took a very thorough interest in the structural details of the access corridor. Marcus looked at his son. Kale looked back with the complete, unfiltered attention of something that has just arrived and is gathering data on everything. His grip, when Marcus raised his right hand and the small fingers closed around one of his, was the oldest reflex in the world. Just instinct. Just the thing that is older than fear or strategy or the accumulated logic of 15 years of surviving situations designed to be unsurvivable. Hello, Marcus said. I'm your father. I'm going to be right here. The dome groaned. The emergency strips flickered. Somewhere in the walls of the Ratian hub, the ventilations cycled, pushing air through passages that tasted of old minerals and distant stars. The Keth Vorath Verification Tribunal took 11 weeks to formally close the Kalanis debt file. I spent most of those weeks in a medical facility on Kala Station, which had the good manners to not pump artificial lavender through its ventilation system. Real lavender, it turned out, was difficult to replicate. You needed the particular combination of specific soil and a specific amount of hard light, and whatever it was that plant itself decided to do with those inputs. The complexity was in the doing, not the formula. That was true of most things that mattered. Alara came every day. She brought kale, and she brought coffee that was exactly right. And she sometimes brought documents that the colonial authority needed Marcus to sign, and she sometimes brought nothing except herself, and the baby, and the specific quality of quiet that exists between two people who have passed something together and come out knowing more precisely what the other one is made of. Zivo came twice. He brought equipment schematics and a bottle of something that was technically legal in 4 jurisdictions, and the second time he came, he sat in the chair by the window for 3 hours without saying much, which was, for Zivo, the equivalent of a very long speech. Shepard, who had apparently been extracted from the annex in the same evidence package operation that Goldsmith had coordinated, sent a message. It contained no words. It contained a photograph of a hand of cards, laid out on a plain surface in a pattern that Marcus, looking at it for a long time, still couldn't fully decode. He thought about it sometimes, while he was healing, the pattern in the cards. The game that no one else understood the rules to. He thought there might be something in it about the nature of a long operation. That the moves that matter are usually the ones that look, outside, like they aren't moves at all. Director Henley visited once. He came without a data slate, which was a notable absence. He sat in the same chair Zivo had used and looked at Marcus, with the face that had stopped being surprised by anything decades ago. The array discharge evidence was thorough, he said. You've created a considerable amount of paperwork. Try to be less thorough in the future, Marcus said. Henley was quiet for a moment. The annex program will be reviewed, he said. I thought you should know that. I thought you should know, Marcus said, that 30 people in there are still waiting. Henley looked at him. He nodded once. Then he picked up his coat and left. On the day Marcus was discharged, the morning light over Kala Station had a quality he didn't have a word for. Not amber. Something warmer. Something that came through the atmospheric dome, in the specific way that light through a dome always looks a little like it's been filtered. Through something handmade. A little like it's been considered before it arrives. He walked out of the medical facility with his left arm in a brace, and his ribs still reminding him of their existence, and Alara beside him and Kale against her chest, and for a moment he just stood in the light. Kala Station in the morning was not beautiful in any formal sense. It was a working settlement. The architecture was functional. The streets were industrial-grade composite. The atmosphere processors on the northern ridge made a sound like distant machinery that you stopped hearing after the first few days. There were people moving through it, going where they were going, in the way that people in settlements do, with the purposeful ordinary motion of lives being lived. The specific humanity of 40,000 people just existing in the same pressurized space, buying food and arguing about routes and carrying things and stopping to look at nothing in particular, the way that humans will stop and look at nothing in particular for no reason that any external observer could model. The Keth Vorath had studied humans for 50 years. They had volumes of observational data. They understood human biology, human logistics, human weapons capability. They had built an entire doctrine around the prediction of human behavior, and the doctrine was very good. It was thorough and data-driven, and it accounted for most things. It had not accounted for the man who came back from the dead for his wife. It had not accounted for the arms dealer in the ridiculous jacket who rewired a Keth Vorath resonance array while making jokes about airballs. It had not accounted for the old man playing a card game alone in a facility that was supposed to be inescapable, feeding exit routes to the person who would eventually need them. It had not accounted for 40,000 people living their ordinary lives in a dome that a dead man had decided, alone and without authorization, was not going to fall. The doctrine was very good. It just didn't account for stubbornness. It didn't have a variable for the specific human willingness to accept a cost that all rational modeling says you won't pay, and do it anyway. Not because you've calculated a favorable outcome, but because there is something underneath calculation, something older and less elegant and more durable, something that the Keth Vorath with their 50 years of data had looked at and never been able to name. Marcus stood in the morning light over Cala Station, with his son's hand wrapped around his finger, and watched 40,000 people go about the business of existing. Then he went home.